On air 24/7. This is today's News Talk TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're in the second hour of this live broadcast. Thank you for coming along for the ride. Hello to everybody in the TNT chat community. Great to see our numbers building up there. Great to see you guys. Great to be back from a short hiatus. Now, we'll get back to the biggest story right now in the United States is the sort of nationwide campus protest, the uproar. And on the heels of this, we've got a legislative kind of crisis, constitutional crisis going on with the anti-Semitism bill that's kind of being rammed through the legislature. We're going to try to make sense of some of these issues. I want to bring on to the stage right now independent journalist Michael Tracey is joining us on the live link. Michael has actually been to the campuses in question, Columbia University, right there in Manhattan, Michael, and thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, we've got some, hold on, we had some feedback coming in there. I think we've dealt with that. So, Michael, tell us your first impressions on this. I know there's this story that's in the mainstream media, and thank God we've got people like you that actually go there and sort of show what's actually going on. So let's talk about that discrepancy. What was your sort of impression, your feelings, your experience on what was actually happening versus how it was being reported in the big network coverage?
Well, what happens is you have these mainline media organs that will just credulously regurgitate whatever the ADL is feeding them or whatever these pro-Israel advocacy groups are feeding them as to the prevalence or incidence of supposed anti-Semitic harassment on the campus or campuses. And because anti-Semitism is such a nebulous concept that is constantly being debated as to what it even consists of, that's very easily manipulable. And I think a very simple way to conceive of anti-Semitism, at least for the purpose of analyzing a protest event to judge whether it's observable there, is there hatred of Jews qua Jews? Meaning, are people there expressing antipathy toward the existence of Jews as such, right? So that seemed very doubtful to me because, number one, as you may know, half the time the organizers of these protests are themselves Jews. Now, they're not Orthodox for the most part, maybe more liberal American Jews, but still they are of Jewish ethnic and religious background, sometimes very openly and ostentatiously so, which is, more power to them. And also, I mean, a place where you probably wouldn't expect to see like a hotbed of surging anti-Semitism is the Upper West Side of New York City. I mean, that's kind of like ground zero for liberal Jews. It's like the New York Times crowd and stuff. And that's where Columbia University is. So I instinctively was doubtful that what we were being told about this virulent anti-Semitism was really in accordance with reality. So I went to Columbia for the first time, I think it was a week ago, last Friday. And one of the first things that I happened across was this woman who was clearly just a professional instigator, meaning she was going to the Columbia campus or the periphery of the campus because it was actually closed down when I first got there to students or to everyone but students or people with the official ID. Because the night before there had been a counter protest where pro-Israel people were showing up waving Israeli flags and, trying to make a scene. Which, again, I don't have much of a problem with in principle because people have a right under the Constitution to engage in raucous protest and demonstration and whatever they like. But there's clearly a whole strategy going on where you have pro-Israel people who show up intentionally at a protest or demonstration like this, knowing that if they antagonize or if they try to gin up some incident, they can then twist that and reframe it as anti-Semitism as though it has to do with themselves being Jewish. Whereas I'm sure if, let's say an evangelical Christian went to an event who was like one of these hardcore pro-Israel people like a John Hagee or whomever, the fire-breathing preachers who think that Jesus is going to return to earth and rule over the world from Jerusalem. If they went to one of these campuses and were expounding a pro-Israel view, they probably would encounter some pushback, but would they be able to then call that anti-Semitism? Or could it be cast as anti-Semitism even if they're not Jewish? No, clearly the operative variable there is the pro-Israel advocacy, obviously. So what I did was, so at the first time I went to Columbia, I saw this woman who was I saw standing in front of like the Columbia fences, filming herself in one of these, dramatic, social media performances where she was claiming that the NYPD and the Columbia security were barring Jews from the campus. All right, since you go around just filming people without even asking for their consent, why don't you answer a couple questions?
Are you still following me?
What is your whole endeavor here?
He's following me again.
I'm not following you. I'm walking on a public sidewalk.
You came back after
I had no idea that you were back here.
So now I'm being followed by 2 new friends.
You're not being followed.
I'd love to know who you are. He was telling me about you.
Right. I was telling lots of people about you because you're trying to gin up a phony controversy where you're asserting that the NYPD and the security staff are anti-Semitic and that they're barring Jews from campus, which you know is false. You're just trying to create a whole social media hubbub to enhance your clout, which I think is in very poor taste. This is Friday night of last week. And I knew that was totally false because I couldn't get onto the campus, and neither could anybody else without a Columbia ID at that point. So she was just fabricating something to perpetuate a victimhood narrative. And it turned out that she was like this professional, I don't even know what she is, a social media influencer. She's affiliated with PragerU, which is this literally Orthodox Jewish conservative advocacy organization that pumps out social media content. She was affiliated with various other like conservative agitprop media organizations, and she was like an intern for Mike Pence in the Trump White House, where she was celebrating this like executive order that Trump signed that actually contributed to codifying the anti-Semitism definition that was just passed this week by Congress and legislatively as in form of federal legislation in terms of governing civil rights law. But anyway, that's sort of a side issue. So then I figure, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to rely on these secondhand accounts or of people who are biased actors. And that includes possibly pro-Palestinian people as well, because they have an interest in downplaying, let's say that there is legitimate anti-Semitism, and they don't want to tarnish their cause. So they probably have an incentive to kind of put a damper on that as well. So I just want to know if it exists. Is it out there? I was doubtful. I want to know it exists. So what is my best option? I reasoned. Well, people kind of always amusingly assume I'm Jewish anyway, which is kind of an honor in a way. So I'm just going to get a yarmulke or a kippah, and I'm going to get a big Star of David necklace hanging from my neck.
A gold star, with a gold chain.
With a gold chain, yeah, bling, Jewish bling. And just see if I get targeted with any harassment on the grounds of the Jewish religious insignia that I'm clearly adorning myself with. And it's just so hilariously the opposite. I mean, I went to Princeton last Saturday, where there was also an encampment and whatnot, and it couldn't have been more laid back. I mean, there was just nothing remotely threatening about it. Of course, there were all Jews there. I mean, the caricatures of these like social media scammers and profiteers and agitprop peddlers who will just cling to some little snippet of some encounter and then claim that it's this surge of devastating anti-Semitism. It's just nonsense. I would be happy to concede, if it existed, if there were evidence for it, that there was some incident of anti-Semitism on any of these protests, because you know what? It's a big country. There's all kind of cranks and kooks. And it's always possible that something could happen. I actually was in Birmingham, England in October. And I went to a pro-Palestinian demonstration. And as I ordinarily do, I was just going around and kind of testing people's views on things. I wanted to understand what they were expressing and what they were thinking about, like the October 7th attack, because it was like a couple weeks after. And there was a time where a bunch of kind of Muslim youths, because Birmingham is a very Muslim-heavy city, sort of like encircled me and were trying to intimidate me. And I was like getting asked if I was Jewish or Israeli. And they were basically trying to, I mean, you could reasonably depict that as something that's akin to anti-Semitism. That wasn't a huge deal. It wasn't like life-altering or the end of the world. But it was at least something that could be reasonably characterized as like something in the realm of anti-Semitism. But in the U.S., on college campuses in the Upper West Side, in Princeton, New Jersey, in New Haven, Connecticut, in Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I mean, give me a break. These people act like there's this pogrom. I mean, Tom Cotton, who we're going to talk about in a bit, Tom Cotton actually said that there's a pogrom at Columbia University where Jews are just being, I guess, chased into attics, and they're likening it. He was saying that Joe Biden has sent in the federal shock troops to rescue like 1,000 Anne Franks or something. It's absurd. But no, I didn't encounter a single incident of it, and in fact, there was lots of comity and goodwill among even what people could obviously observe that I was wearing Jewish religious garb. There was a funny moment at Princeton that I put in like my thread that went amazingly viral. I wasn't even really expecting that. But there was one, like I didn't have the pin in my yarmulke to keep it affixed to my head in the case of wind or gusts of wind and stuff. So it actually blew off my head because it was kind of like a rainy, windy day. And somebody in a keffiyeh, is that how you pronounce it? Retrieved the keffiyeh. Yeah, ran over and retrieved the yarmulke that flew off and ran and gave it back to me. And it was like, normal goodwill, good nature among people. So, I mean, look, obviously my own personal experience is not going to be necessarily determinative of where anybody anywhere can possibly experience at a college campus, but it was a way to test these claims somewhat objectively, rather than just taking on faith that all these biased or self-interested actors are presenting a truthful depiction of the alleged incidents of anti-Semitism at these campuses. Because now it legitimately is becoming a mass psychosis. You have top senators and members of Congress saying that, the Jewish students are being tormented with the same kinds of taunts and threats as their great-grandparents experienced in Nazi Germany. That's what John Barrasso, who's like the second, I think, third top-ranking, I think the third-ranking senator in the Republican conference in the Senate. That's what he said a few days ago. It's stuff like that over and over again. As far as I can ascertain, it's just a complete fabrication, and it's being used to justify, as usual, enhancing the power of the national security state, curbing speech, curbing free expression, even potentially curbing exercise of religion based on this new anti-Semitism prohibition that they've imposed. So yeah, it's wild. It's one of the most baseless and just fundamentally stupid moral panics I've ever seen ginned up in the U.S., and I've been around for a decent amount of time at this point.
Back in the day, I could see you being deployed by the old Howard Stern shows, a sort of crypto Gentile undercover at the protest. It would have worked as a segment, actually. But have you ever seen anything this crazy, like the amount of just blatant lying and misrepresenting that's going on? This is like a hysteria, Michael, that I've never seen anything on this level before, mainly from the right in this case. But they've just gone crazy with this thing. Can you kind of explain how this phenomenon has come to pass?
I can't think of a good parallel for it, frankly. Yeah, I mean, the Republicans, which includes like the conservative media propaganda apparatus, like the Daily Wire and, that whole crowd, and, talk radio and whatever, they've clearly calculated that they can try to cultivate a fissure within the Democratic Party coalition, and that's going to redound to the Republicans' political advantage for the election. Maybe there is some sound logic to that. I don't know. I tend to be a little doubtful, but it's hard to say. It's hard to really project with much confidence as to how any of this will unfold politically. But they clearly, as of now, are reasoning that they stand to gain politically from just churning out a constant avalanche of just utter BS to inflame the story. Like Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, triumphantly strode onto the campus of Columbia last week. And that when he does that, and he was, joined by a bunch of other local Republicans from the area, the idea is not to tamp down the tensions. Obviously, that's going to be hugely inflammatory. Now, he wasn't attacked, and they weren't, confronted or anything in a violent or intimidating way, but clearly that's adding fuel to the fire, which is what they want. Because they're even, as of this week, I read, I think it was yesterday, they're already like the Republican PR operatives are already in the process of creating ads or commercials where they're snippeting out clips of different protest activity and saying, like, this is what Joe Biden's America is. As if Joe Biden, I mean, another perverse part of this is they're trying to associate Biden politically with the protesters, because they're claiming that he needs to pander to the protesters. He needs to court them as voters. So that proves that Biden and the Democrats are in hock to the pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party or something like that, even though Biden has literally provided more condition-free military support to Israel than any U.S. president ever at this point. In addition to the political support, the diplomatic support, the whole suite of support that the U.S. presidency provides to Israel, Biden has done that, but on steroids. And so, but the Republicans are criticizing Biden for supposedly being pro-Hamas. I mean, even Donald Trump, who I keep getting told by like these online dissident right people is like secretly skeptical of Israel, or has he like these secret anti-interventionist instinct that he just bizarrely never exhibits. It's always like in his mind that they're able to mind read. But every time he blurts something out of his mouth, it totally contradicts that whole thesis, including when he called into the Sean Hannity show as the Columbia raid was going on, which I happened to observe because I went there the day that the NYPD was mobilizing for that raid. And Trump gets on the Hannity show, one of his typical phone interviews where he's just kind of casually chatting, it seems, and says, oh, yeah, I don't think Biden even stands with Israel. I don't think he supports Israel. So you have the main opposition incentivizing the Democrats and Biden to even be more feverishly pro-Israel than they've already been. So it's an insane kind of miasma of just idiocy. And yeah, another thing to think about is if, let's say, a Republican was in power right now in the presidency. Let's say it was Trump, who just makes everybody hysterical. Supporters, opponents, everybody just loses their mind completely with Trump. But if Trump had delivered an address before the nation, like Biden did yesterday, and denounced the protests as violent, quote unquote, and anti-Semitic, and essentially called for their removal, and then all the jurisdictions of his affiliated with his political party then dutifully comply. It's like what happened in New York, happened in Los Angeles within hours of Biden saying that, even Portland, Oregon. People would be screaming, like AOC would be screaming in a blithering frenzy that we're all in the middle of a fascist nightmare. But because it's Biden, exactly, and he doesn't seem fully with it, I don't know, I guess it's not fascism. But then, so nothing makes sense according to any like discernible logic or reason associated with this issue. It's just insane how crazy making it is. So my contribution was to simply go and observe firsthand to the best of my ability and report. And it's just not consistent with this incredibly histrionic counter portrayal that you see as the dominant narrative in the media. I mean, even CNN. I mean, people would think that, CNN must have an agenda in favor of the left-wing protesters. I mean, that would be like the conventional right-wing understanding. Yet, I mean, there was a infamous, I don't know if you saw it, like a Dana Bash segment.
Oh, hold on. I've got that segment.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's roll. I want to get your reaction to this, Michael. Roll this Dana Bash clip. We'll play in about for 60 seconds, Luke, but go ahead and roll this.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Dana Bash. We start with destruction, violence, and hate on college campuses across the country. This was the scene just a short while ago at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Police clashing with protesters. 12 people were arrested. Hours earlier, protests rocked the University of Arizona, where campus police used chemical irritant munitions to remove protesters. Around the same time at UCLA, pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian groups were attacking each other, hurling all kinds of objects, a wood pallet, fireworks, parking cones, even a scooter. And before that, the NYPD was able to clear Columbia University after protesters barricaded themselves inside a campus building. 300 people were arrested at Columbia and City College of New York. But it is unclear how many were actually students. New York City Mayor Eric Adams warned this morning that professional outside agitators are getting involved.
There is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it. This is a global problem that young people are being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children, and I'm not going to allow that.
Yeah, go ahead and we'll cut this. So there he is, Eric Adams. Eric Adams.
It's hilarious to me. He, as mayor of New York City, is going to combat this global radicalization cabal so that they don't influence the children. And they use the term children to describe like 21-year-old college students, which I find creepy. But to influence the children to have a more positive view of Palestinians or a more negative view of the Israeli obliteration of Gaza, that's only because they're being brainwashed by this unnamed cabal. You know, I was on the scene when that raid happened that he was bragging had been so phenomenally and flawlessly executed. I didn't have a vantage point on the entire thing, but I didn't see anybody who was recognizably a outside agitator. That's always a trope that they trot out. I saw a bunch of meek college girls being frog marched out of the campus. So the idea that they were the massive threat. I mean, one of the NYPD chiefs of the department said the following morning that for the first time in, quote, many years, the NYPD deployed what they call distraction devices, which is a euphemism for flashbang grenades inside the building that the students had been occupying. So apparently the biggest threat to public safety in New York City in, quote, many years were Ivy League college girls. I mean, it couldn't be more absurd.
It is crazy, ridiculous. And the other part of it was kind of interesting was how that they wanted to sort of say that these were there were terrorists in there mixed among the students. I saw reports of that which were completely fabricated. Aaron Mate, I think, from the Gray Zone, pointed one of those out, but just kind of sowing fear that Hamas somehow had infiltrated student movements, and they had their operatives among the students. And then Tom Cotton, let's roll this clip. I want to get your reaction on this. Listen to Tom Cotton here, really taking center stage on this. Talk about fascist rhetoric. This is quite something. Go ahead and roll this.
We're here to discuss the Little Gazas that have risen up on campuses across America, and the liberal college administrators and politicians who refuse to restore law and order and to protect other students. These Little Gazas are disgusting cesspools of anti-Semitic hate, full of pro-Hamas sympathizers, fanatics, and freaks. The terrorist sympathizers in these Little Gazas aren't peacefully protesting Israel's conduct of the war. They're violently and illegally demanding death for Israel, just like their ideological twins, the Ayatollahs in Iran.
Oh my God. So, I mean, is this unhinged? I mean,
Mike Johnson.
It's a senator. That's a U.S. senator, Michael.
Yeah. Well, the Speaker of the House is playing the same tune. And he, remember, is lovingly referred to by Donald J. Trump as MAGA Mike Johnson. He does the bidding of Trump as Speaker of the House as far as can be ascertained. So they're on the same page. Trump blurted out on his Truth Social page, in between complaining about his porn star trial and everything, he finally took the time to comment on a more kind of pressing issue for the general public, and he said shut down the protest or end the protest, or he basically echoed the sentiment of Cotton and Johnson writ large, but maybe in a less adroit way or something. But it was the same thing that was echoed. And then Biden, a couple days later, has the same message. So this is a unity. I mean, they call it a uni party, right? Trump somehow is seen as an exception to the uniparty, and yet he seems to be totally on board with all their endeavors, including the Ukraine funding a couple weeks ago, Israel funding, it's everything. But Mike Johnson, the morning of the Columbia raid, gave another press conference with the whole House Republican leadership, essentially, including the committee chairs, and they announced that after they completed their very important task recently of pushing through the $100 billion war funding bill, which included the Ukraine, Israel, quote unquote, Indo-Pacific, the whole kit and caboodle. Now they were transitioning to their next priority, which which Johnson proclaimed was going to be a whole of the House initiative. So every prong of the House governance structure, every committee, every part of the leadership, they're now going to be devoted for the next several months leading up to the election on, guess what? Anti-Semitism on college campuses. And Mike Johnson said that on behalf of the House Republican Conference, that the students at Columbia were engaging in speech that was not protected of the First Amendment because it was violent speech. So these are the same types of people who were mocking, the special snowflake college campus protesters or whatever from like 2014 to 2023 as unable to emotionally tolerate countervailing opinions or being like unstable and not able to withstand criticism because they're so like emotionally fragile. And now the main talking point coming out of these same organs is that political speech, which can be claimed to create a, quote, unsafe atmosphere for Jewish students, and not just Jewish students writ large, but particularly ardently pro-Israel Jewish students, because remember, there's probably half of Jewish students who don't even agree with that. But those are whatever sliver of Jewish students we're talking about, if they can claim to be made to feel, quote, unsafe by the expression of political speech, then that warrants the immediate intervention of the state to stifle and to punish that speech. So that's what Johnson was calling for. Johnson also said that the Columbia students who occupied the building were terrorists. Now, there should be something distinguished here. It's not protected political speech under the Constitution to occupy a building. They were doing that, the students were doing that out of an impulse of civil disobedience. So that's something that is knowingly in violation of the law, but they were willing to accept the consequences to make their point, right? But Johnson wasn't saying he wasn't just denouncing that. He was denouncing the actual expression of political speech as itself violent or even terroristic. So that's the real chilling part of all this. Everybody understands that if you break a window or you occupy a library to make a point, yeah, you're probably going to incur some legal consequences for that. But what they're now doing is shifting the whole frame to this insistence that the speech itself is criminal and is terroristic or is somehow inherently violent, which really makes a mockery of the Constitution because, sorry, there's no exception in the First Amendment for speech that is deemed to be excessively unfriendly to Israel. And yet that's what the vast majority of lawmakers in the United States seem to have been convinced of.
So you can call for the destruction of the United States, but if you call for the destruction of Israel, you've just fallen foul of this new arbitrary moving target legislation.
Yeah, that's true. If you have
a working definition, Michael, a working definition of anti-Semitism.
That is true. That sounds hyperbolic. That sounds like a possible exaggeration, but it's not. That came right out of the mouth of Josh Gottheimer, who's the Democratic congressman from New Jersey, who is one of the co-drafters of the bill that they passed May 1st with his Republican colleague Mike Lawler from New York. And he said, I posted a clip last night on the floor of the House, that the bill changes federal civil rights law such that to call for the destruction of the Jewish state is now legally impermissible. But conveniently, to call for the destruction of the United States is not legally impermissible. So now the federal government can punish any institution or any potentially individual who's affiliated with a federally supported institution for calling for the destruction of Israel, but not if they call for the destruction of the United States, because that's not a protected category under this cockamamie civil rights statute. That, by the way, also Republicans had previously tended to make a point to rail against as like this enforcer of woke ideology, civil rights law, that is. And now after October 7th of last year, they're falling over themselves to leverage the existing construct of civil rights law, but on behalf of these beleaguered so-called Jewish students who need quote unquote safe spaces. I mean, or safe environments. I mean, there were actually congressmen. There's actually a congressman named Tracey Mann who I posted a clip of yesterday. Who's a no-namer from Kansas, Republican, who said that we have to use the full force of the law to ensure a quote safe environment for quote Jewish students on college campuses. Now, I don't know. I'm old enough to like remember 2014 or even later when like the concept of safe spaces was like the number one thing that every conservative and Republican mocked as to left-wing activists and liberal activists, usually it's with some good cause, because they really were being manipulative in how they kind of marshaled that whole rhetoric or that rhetorical style. It was kind of emotional blackmail to stifle speech. But now they're just doing the same thing, but they have the full weight of the federal government behind them and bipartisan consensus behind them to stamp out opposition to a U.S.-backed pulverization campaign in the Middle East, which is what's going on in Gaza. So it's wild to watch.
In a nutshell, that's basically what's happening. So, I mean, it's a pretty good synopsis, Michael, that you've given there. And I want to share another clip with you after the break, just the bizarre geopolitical kaleidoscope that's riding off the back of this. I've got a clip I want to share with you from Fox News. I'm with Michael Tracey. He's an independent journalist. He's been on the ground in New York City with this whole Farrago and Columbia University, the so-called anti-Semitism crisis, the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas, as they're calling them, protests. Everybody is going hysterical on this, especially in Washington. We'll talk about this and more on the other side. I'm Patrick Henningsen. Stay right there.
Hi. I'm your retirement fear. But don't be scared. You're still in pre-retirement.
Pre-retirement? Does that mean I have more time to plan?
Precisely. Here, this is pretirement.org.
Retirement savings options? Potential tax breaks?
Yep. Ooh.
Oh, I could build up savings for my side hustle. This isn't scary. I'm doing it.
You got this.
Visit thisispretirement.org for free resources to help you customize your action plan.
Most people are unaware that bad bacteria can grow quickly in food that's stored, prepped, or cooked incorrectly, and that can lead to food poisoning. To avoid bad bacteria, always make sure your hands and cooking utensils are clean. Keep raw meat and chicken away from food that won't be cooked. Run your fridge at or below 5 degrees Celsius and use a meat thermometer to ensure your meat's being cooked to at least 75 degrees Celsius. For more tips on keeping bad bacteria at bay, visit foodsafety.asn.au.
This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. We're in hour number 2, final segment of the final hour of this live broadcast here on TNT Today's News Talk. I'm joined by independent journalist Michael Tracey, and I encourage people to follow Michael on X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want to get these live real-time updates, you're only going to get them there. His feed is invaluable, not just with this story, but with a lot of stuff that's breaking. Michael, the stuff that's being jettisoned on the back of all this, I'm going to play you this clip by Fox News here, where they've managed to somehow merge this issue with the whole ramping up China escalation issue, which only Fox can do masterfully. But I want to get your reaction to what you think about this one by Fox. We're going to go ahead and roll this clip of the China clip.
Our next guest escaped religious persecution as a Christian in China at 12 years old, and is now standing up for his threatened Jewish classmates at GWU. Richard Lee joins us now, along with his classmate, Sabrina Soffer. Thank you both so much for being here. Richard, let me start with you. You've seen this type of stuff before, persecution. Does this look like the type of persecution that, say, maybe Christians, other religious groups have faced elsewhere in the world?
Oh, 100%. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. Well, I've personally escaped from China when I was 12. And to be exact, oppression always starts with hatred. And hatred always, time and time again, a lot of times in history, started with anti-Semitism. And that is what we're seeing on our college campus right now, right in front of our doorsteps. And it's very, very sad.
No doubt. You said you can't go a minute without hearing a chant or being confronted with this kind of stuff. Sabrina, this hits home for you. You're Jewish. Have you felt threatened directly or indirectly? I mean, what kind of environment is George Washington University allowing?
Yeah. So again, thank you for having me. And I personally, I think this has been going on for way too long. This has been 20 years in the making. I've been threatened, not even now. 2 years back, I've been threatened by these same sorts of students. And at first, I didn't feel safe. I really didn't. I remember one night I was like shaking in my bed at like midnight because I heard that there were some students who were after me, and I was really afraid with what to do.
Why won't school leadership do anything? It's one thing to have a political point of view. It's a whole nother thing to have.
Okay. So she was threatened 2 years ago. George Washington University, Michael, it's right between K Street and J Street. That's like ground zero for like the most pro-Jewish and Israeli organizations in the country. What are they talking about?
Well, I think what they're really trying to do, and why Fox framed the issue in that way, was because think of who Fox's audience is. All these cable news networks have an audience that is incredibly old. I think the average age of a Fox News viewer is like 68. And so they're trying to connect this supposed persecution of Jews to persecution of Christians, which is probably going to be more relatable to the majority of Fox viewers. I'm curious for the Chinese gentleman to flesh out in a little more detail how whatever persecution he claims to have experienced in China originated with anti-Semitism. That would be interesting.
Well, he was 12 years old, so it was probably quite traumatic at the time, apparently.
Yeah, but he says it's the oldest hatreds. Maybe it didn't. So he's claimed that it infected China somehow and led to his, exodus from the country. But I'm sure all the Fox viewers watching that were like nodding in solemn approval, even though it makes zero sense. So yeah, I think that's what they were trying to basically flesh out there. That they wanted to contextualize the alleged harassment or targeting of Jews to this kind of larger global phenomenon of like targeting Judeo-Christian values or something, so the Fox viewers could feel like they have a bit more of a direct personal stake in it. But yeah, it's just wild.
You got to give him credit, though, Michael. I give him full marks for pulling that segment.
It was creative.
They brought China in. They brought the CCP in, Christianity, anti-Semitism. Made it, whipped it all up into a nice little segment. Amazing.
You need to demonstrate a fair amount of creativity to maintain the viability of this narrative, because there's so little substance to it that you have to really stretch for content to keep churning out the fodder, because it doesn't have much actual facts to stand on. So yeah, I give credit to the Fox producers for their creativity.
So where is this going to go? This is one of those pieces of legislation, Michael. I know you also had a lot to say about the arms bill that was rammed through. They changed the rules and did not allow for the type of dissent and debate that you normally would for a bill like that. Now you've got this express there's this kind of reactionary legislation. Michael, in Britain, this is the thing that a lot of people absolutely decry in British parliamentarian politics, is they do these emergency bills on the back of some emotive event. And it's just like the next day, something's a law. The United States used to have built-in firewalls to prevent that type of thing from happening. But those firewalls seem to be somewhat, broken down bit by bit now. And we've seen one rushed piece of legislation after another, and with not great results.
Well, so much of American governance, especially in the federal level, is predicated on claims of an emergency. Even the supplemental "quote unquote" national security funding bill that was finally passed 2 weeks ago was, in the text of the legislation, framed as an emergency supplemental because it's not part of the annual appropriations process. It was this standalone spending bill that appropriates, approximately $100 billion in additional funding. I don't think it was rushed, though. I think that's kind of the wrong way to put it. I actually think that there was very deliberate tactical maneuvering that had to be employed by, in particular, Mike Johnson, who's kind of like an evil genius, to see this through on the time scale that he saw it through. I mean, remember, the complaint coming from liberal media for months was that the Republicans were allegedly stalling. Biden put out a supplemental funding request that packaged all these items together: Israel, Ukraine, quote unquote, Indo-Pacific, and then border stuff, and then a whole potpourri of other stuff back in October. And then it finally passed comprehensively in April. So I don't think it's quite correct to say that it was rushed. It was just the American political system like beautifully coalesced and checked every box to ensure its passage. And that included securing the endorsement of Donald Trump. I know I'm a broken record on this, but that was the decisive political factor in ensuring the passage of that Ukraine funding bill. And yet everybody persists in this delusion that Trump is like against Ukraine or against Ukraine funding, even though he started funding Ukraine in 2017. It's another story. But, you know, I've heard from Republican lawmakers who've confirmed this to me. Okay, it's not just some crazy theory that I have. And it's out there. Mike Johnson went in the days leading up to the House vote on April 20th. Mike Johnson was making the rounds on conservative media. So Ben Shapiro, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, etc., boasting about how Trump was on board with the legislation. So what does that do? Of course, that neutralizes Republican opposition to the bill. Trump single-handedly can pick Republican primary winners for congressional and Senate races. So yes, they do follow Trump's lead, and Trump's position on this was made well known, which is that he supported it, partially on the ground that, you know, it was supposedly structured as a loan, which is a total fabrication. And even the part of it that was supposedly nominally structured as a loan was like only the economic assistance, quote unquote, which is basically the money that just goes into the Ukraine government's general fund to pay government workers and such. The whole military aid, quote unquote, none of that was even nominally structured as a loan. So that was another just lie. And it was also instantly forgivable after the November election. So the rationale for Trump apparently was that the U.S. might as well just subsidize another 2 years of trench warfare in Ukraine because that will give him some kind of leverage, because he assumes he's going to win the election in November, and maybe he will. But it comes at the cost of pumping out another, that was the largest quote unquote aid package that Congress has passed since the entire war. So it's enough for about 2 years approximately of additional war funding. So yeah, but if you notice, the Israel component of that was $24 billion, right? So that was also huge. And that was catalyzed by the Iran missile salvo on Israel, which the Republicans, that the very night that happened, Steve Scalise, the House Majority Leader, who's right under Johnson is basically just the bagman for Scalise, who has much more experience in Republican leadership and legislative process, although Johnson in his own right now is kind of a master tactician as well. That very night, Scalise said, okay, look, we're going to do away with our entire pre-planned legislative schedule for this following week, and we're now going to drill down on passing this long overdue national security supplemental bill because Israel needs our help. We have to replenish their missile defense. That was how they catalyzed it. And getting back to the campus protests, I mean, I think the students organizers have a rational impetus for really amping up their protest because it comes right on the heels of the U.S. government and Biden signing another $24 billion in conditions-free, quote unquote, aid to continue perpetual war in Gaza.
It's a great marketing exercise, and it's also a good incentive for Israel to go hit another Iranian embassy somewhere, get Iran to retaliate with some drones, and boom, 30 billion is checks in the post, as they say. Michael, look, we've run out of time for this segment. Michael Tracey, I want to thank you for joining us. It's been a very, very good discussion. And follow Michael on his Substack as well. We'll drop links in the TNT chat community and also on X Twitter. But thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Michael Tracey, independent journalist. And also a big thank you to Joseph Arthur and Brian McLean in hour number 1. I hope we dealt with this issue in a thorough way, and hopefully you guys got something from this. Anyway, it's great to have you guys back. Great to be here in the chair. I'll see you guys on Monday, same time, same place.